Michael Jordan sees a young player humiliated for missing free throws. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Michael Jordan's story begins in the small town of Wilmington, North Carolina, where a young boy named Michael was introduced to basketball by his father, James. Growing up in a household that valued hard work and discipline, Michael found an early outlet in sports. It wasn't basketball that first caught his eye, though. As a child, he was a talented baseball player, but there was something about basketball that ultimately claimed his attention. In high school, Michael wasn't initially the star. He was cut from the varsity basketball team during his sophomore year, a crushing blow to a teenager who had already dreamt of greatness. His heart sank when he found out that he wasn't good enough, but it was in that moment of rejection that Jordan's resolve truly began to take shape. Instead of walking away, he put in the work. Every day, Michael practiced relentlessly, shooting, dribbling, running drills, and improving his skills. The following year, he was not only back on the team but quickly became a standout player. His athleticism, work ethic, and natural ability made him the undeniable leader on the court. He was no longer just a promising player, he was a force to be reckoned with. Jordan's rise in high school was fast and undeniable, and soon the college scouts came knocking. His decision to play at the University of North Carolina was one that set the stage for his future success. Under Coach Dean Smith, Jordan's game matured. He wasn't just a scorer anymore, he learned the value of team play, of passing, and of leadership. In 1982, as a freshman, he hit the game-winning shot in the NCAA championship game against Georgetown, a moment that marked his arrival as a clutch performer and a budding star. But even as Jordan gained national recognition, he was still trying to define what made him great. His first 2 years in college were filled with challenges, learning to balance his individual talents with the needs of a team, and finding his role in a larger system. He wasn't yet the unstoppable force the world would come to know. Instead, he was a hungry young player with a chip on his shoulder, eager to prove himself. In the 1984 NBA draft, Jordan's name was called by the Chicago Bulls, and with it, a new chapter in basketball history began. But even as the Bulls selected him as the third overall pick, there was a sense of uncertainty. The NBA was a different game, and many questioned how Jordan's skills would translate to the professional level. Despite his obvious talent, the challenge of playing against the world's best loomed large. Jordan's rookie season was filled with early lessons. He quickly became the Bulls' best player, but the team was struggling. The Bulls, with a roster that lacked depth and experience, had not yet found their identity. Still, Jordan's impact was undeniable. He averaged 28.2 points per game, quickly earning the Rookie of the Year honors. But success came at a cost. As good as Jordan was, he couldn't single-handedly lift the team into championship contention. His struggles with leadership, his obsession with personal success, and his inability to fully trust his teammates hindered the team's progress. It wasn't until the following year, in 1985, that Jordan began to understand that greatness wasn't just about scoring or personal achievement. As the Bulls continued to lose, Michael's frustration grew. But a key turning point came when the team hired Doug Collins as head coach. Collins saw something in Jordan that others missed, a unique talent that needed to be channeled into something greater than individual stardom. Collins gave Jordan the freedom to lead the team on offense, but also emphasized the importance of teamwork. Jordan took this lesson to heart, and the result was immediate. The Bulls began to win, and Jordan's game started to evolve. He wasn't just taking every shot, he was learning to trust his teammates, to create opportunities for them, and to let his own success flow from the success of the team. But as his skills developed, so did the pressures of being the face of the Chicago Bulls. Every game, every shot, every moment, Jordan felt the weight of expectations. It was one thing to be the best player on a losing team, but another thing entirely to be the best player on a team with championship aspirations. The desire to succeed became a burden, and at times, Jordan's frustrations boiled over. As the 1980s wore on, the Chicago Bulls began to emerge as a legitimate contender in the NBA. Yet, they were still far from reaching the pinnacle. Jordan's incredible individual performances kept them afloat, but the team lacked the necessary depth and chemistry to win it all. Jordan understood that he needed help if the Bulls were ever going to compete for a championship. Enter the 1987 to 1988 season. With Jordan playing at an MVP level, the Bulls finally started to click as a team. But even with their success, there was a feeling that something was still missing. The team had yet to break through the final barrier, winning a championship. Every loss was a reminder that the NBA's elite were still out of reach. In the offseason, the Bulls made their move. They traded for a key piece, Scottie Pippen, a player who would eventually become Jordan's perfect complement. The partnership between the two was immediate and undeniable. Pippen's versatility, defense, and leadership allowed Jordan to focus on what he did best, scoring and leading the offense. Despite the promising partnership, it wasn't an easy road to a title. The Detroit Pistons, led by the bad boys of basketball, presented the biggest obstacle in the Bulls' path. The Pistons were physical, relentless, and, most importantly, they had the tools to shut down Jordan. The rivalry between the two teams would define the next chapter of Michael Jordan's career. Through these early years, Michael Jordan was learning what it took to be great, not just on the court, but in the heart and mind. The struggle for success wasn't easy, and it wasn't a straight line. Each failure, each loss, each moment of doubt would eventually add to the story of one of the greatest basketball players the world had ever seen. By the end of the 1980s, Michael Jordan was no longer just a promising young talent. He was the face of the Chicago Bulls and the future of the NBA. He had proven that his talent wasn't just hype, it was the real deal. But in many ways, his journey was just beginning. As the new decade approached, the question wasn't if Jordan would be great, it was how long it would take him to become the best to ever play the game. Little did anyone know that the next chapter would not only redefine basketball but would set the stage for the greatest rivalry the sport had ever seen. The noise in the arena was deafening, a mix of excitement and anxious anticipation. It was a critical moment in the game, one of those rare moments that would define the course of a season. A young player, barely out of his teens, stood at the free throw line, with the weight of the game and his team's hopes resting on his shoulders. The ball was in his hands, and he knew what he had to do, make the free throws and secure the win. His teammates stood around him, their faces a mixture of hope and nervousness. And then there was the crowd, their eyes fixed on him, waiting for him to perform. But with each passing second, his nerves began to mount. The pressure was unbearable. The young player took a deep breath, tried to block out the noise, and prepared for his shot. He bounced the ball, tried to steady his hands, but the thoughts were racing in his head. He could hear the whispering voices of doubt, questioning his ability to handle this moment. His knees felt weak, his palms sweaty. But he tried to shake it off and focus. The first free throw clanged off the rim, an ugly miss that echoed through the arena. The crowd reacted with a collective groan. It wasn't just a miss. It was the kind of miss that seemed to amplify the weight of failure. His teammates exchanged uncomfortable glances, as if the game had already slipped away. He stepped back for the second shot, feeling as if the whole world was watching. He bounced the ball again, this time with less confidence. He looked at the rim, aimed, and shot. This time, it was no better. The ball hit the front of the rim, spinning out. A complete failure. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in a roar of disappointment. The young player lowered his head, a wave of humiliation washing over him. He could hear the murmurs, the whispers, the doubts. His teammates tried to console him, but it was clear. The moment had passed, and the game was lost. In the locker room afterward, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The coach didn't speak immediately, the silence was louder than words. The young player sat in his corner, his head buried in his hands, the sting of failure cutting deeper with each passing second. The sound of the locker doors opening and closing echoed in the background, but he could only hear the relentless beating of his own heart. It wasn't just the missed free throws. It was the weight of the moment, the eyes of everyone, the hope of the team, and the spotlight that magnified his failure. The doubt started to creep in. Was he good enough? Would he ever be able to make it in this league? His future, once filled with promise, now seemed uncertain. The door to the locker room opened quietly. In walked Michael Jordan. The room immediately quieted. MJ was a legend, and his presence commanded respect, even in the toughest of times. But there was something different about this moment. Jordan wasn't here to criticize or point out the mistakes. He wasn't here to throw around his usual words of wisdom about working harder or being better. No, this was different. Jordan walked up to the young player, who hadn't even looked up yet, still lost in his own self-recrimination. MJ could sense the defeat in the room. He sat down beside him and didn't say anything at first. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if MJ was giving the young player time to process everything, time to realize that failure wasn't the end, but rather a stepping stone. After a long pause, Jordan spoke, his voice calm, yet powerful. "You think this is the worst thing that's ever happened to you?" he asked, looking at the young player. "Trust me, it's not." The young player finally looked up, his eyes filled with confusion. How could missing 2 free throws at a critical moment not be the worst thing that could happen? Jordan could see the doubt in his eyes, but he didn't rush to explain. Instead, he leaned in slightly, almost as if he was sharing a secret. "Let me tell you something," Jordan said, his tone softening. "I've missed shots too. I've failed. Hell, I've lost games that I should have won. I've been in situations where the world was watching, and I couldn't deliver. And I'm telling you right now, it's part of the journey." Jordan paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He wasn't speaking from a place of arrogance or superiority, he was speaking from experience. The great Michael Jordan, who had won multiple championships and cemented his legacy as one of the greatest basketball players of all time, was admitting to failure. He was showing vulnerability. And in that moment, he was offering the most valuable lesson he could. "When I was a kid," Jordan continued, "I had my own moment. It was in college, during a crucial game. The team was relying on me, just like your teammates were relying on you. And I choked. I missed a shot that could have won the game. I felt like the world was coming down on me. I was ready to quit." The young player, still in shock, listened closely. This wasn't just a story about basketball, it was a lesson about life. Jordan wasn't just talking about the game, he was talking about resilience, about the ability to overcome adversity. "I remember sitting in my locker after that game, just like you're sitting here now," Jordan said, his voice becoming more personal. "I thought it was the end for me. But then I realized something important. You don't quit when you fail. You get up, you work harder, and you come back stronger. That's how you win, not just in basketball, but in life." For the first time that evening, the young player felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't alone in this. The greatest player to ever play the game had been where he was. Jordan had failed. Jordan had doubted himself. But Jordan had also come back stronger, better, and more determined than ever. The conversation between Jordan and the young player continued long into the night, a quiet exchange that would ultimately change the course of the young player's career. In that locker room, where failure had initially seemed like the end of the road, a new path had been paved. The young player realized that failure wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace, learn from, and grow stronger. As Jordan stood up to leave, he gave the young player one last piece of advice. "Don't let one bad moment define you," Jordan said, turning to leave the locker room. "The true test is how you respond to it." The young player sat there for a long time after MJ left, his mind racing. The pain of the missed free throws was still there, but the sting was different now. It wasn't as sharp. It was no longer something he would dwell on. He understood now that mistakes were inevitable, that it was how you came back from them that mattered. The road to greatness wasn't always smooth, but with each setback, there was an opportunity to rise again. And so, in that quiet locker room, the young player's journey was transformed. The lesson wasn't just about basketball, it was about life, about overcoming self-doubt, and about the power of resilience. Thanks to Michael Jordan, a moment of humiliation had turned into the first step of a new path, a path that would lead to growth, redemption, and perhaps, greatness. The year was 1991. The Chicago Bulls, led by Michael Jordan, were finally ready to challenge the league's elite. It was a moment years in the making, Jordan's first appearance in the NBA Finals. The weight of expectations hung heavily on his shoulders. He wasn't just representing the Chicago Bulls, he was carrying the hopes of a franchise and a city that had waited for a championship for decades. His talent was undeniable, but this was the true test. Could he take his game to the next level and lead his team to victory? The stakes were higher than ever. For years, Jordan had been the league's best player, but the playoffs had been a different story. The Bulls had reached the Eastern Conference Finals 3 times in the late 1980s, but each time, they had been defeated by the Detroit Pistons' bad boys. The Pistons' brutal, physical style of play had become a psychological hurdle for Jordan and the Bulls. Despite his individual brilliance, the team had fallen short. But 1991 felt different. The Pistons were no longer in their way, and the Bulls were healthier, more balanced, and better coached. This was Jordan's moment to prove that he was more than just a regular season sensation. The 1991 Finals pitted the Chicago Bulls against the Los Angeles Lakers, a team with a storied history, led by Magic Johnson. The Lakers were coming off a championship win in 1988 and were still a powerhouse in the league. Magic was at the tail end of his career, but he was still a force to be reckoned with. The Lakers' experience in the finals was a stark contrast to the Bulls' youthful inexperience. The Lakers had been here before, while the Bulls were unproven. Game 1 of the finals was a revelation. The Bulls took control from the opening tip-off. Jordan's leadership was on full display, his scoring, playmaking, and defense. The Lakers had no answer for him. He dominated every aspect of the game. Chicago won 108-105, and Jordan finished with 36 points. It wasn't just the scoring, it was the way Jordan orchestrated the game, made his teammates better, and stepped up in the biggest moments. The world was witnessing a changing of the guard. But even as the Bulls took a commanding 1-0 lead in the series, Jordan wasn't content. He knew the job wasn't finished. His focus was sharper than ever, and his desire to win burned even brighter. Jordan was no longer just trying to prove that he was the best player in the league. Now, he had a championship to chase. The goal was clear: beat the Lakers, win the finals, and cement his place among the all-time greats. Game 2 was another dominant performance. Jordan poured in 29 points, but it was his ability to make the right decisions in critical moments that stood out. He wasn't just scoring, he was controlling the flow of the game, managing the clock, and making clutch plays when needed. But it wasn't just about Jordan. His teammates were stepping up too. Scottie Pippen was playing the best basketball of his career, and the Bulls' supporting cast, which had been questioned in years past, was finally proving their worth. With the series tied 1-1, the Bulls headed back to Chicago, but Jordan's focus never wavered. Game 3 marked a shift. The Lakers, desperate to avoid falling behind 2-1, came out with intensity. Magic Johnson, ever the leader, fought back with everything he had. But Jordan was undeterred. He continued to attack relentlessly, finishing with 29 points and playing the kind of defense that would eventually earn him a spot on the all-defensive team. His defensive pressure on Magic Johnson, forcing turnovers and disrupting plays, became one of the key turning points in the series. The Bulls won 104-96, taking a 2-1 series lead. As the Bulls approached Game 4, the sense of destiny was palpable. Michael Jordan was playing at an otherworldly level, and it seemed like the championship was within reach. The Lakers had no answer for him, and every time they tried to mount a comeback, Jordan's brilliance extinguished it. He scored 22 points in Game 4, but it wasn't just the points, it was the leadership, the clutch plays, and the unwavering belief in his team. When the final buzzer sounded, the Bulls had won 108-101, and the series was over. The Chicago Bulls had won the 1991 NBA championship, their first in franchise history, and Michael Jordan had led them there. The moment was surreal. Jordan had finally done it. The man who had been criticized for not winning the big one, who had been questioned in the early stages of his career, was now an NBA champion. It wasn't just about the victory, it was about everything that came before it. The years of hard work, the failures, the lessons learned, and the growth. Jordan had climbed the mountain, and at that moment, he had reached the summit. But even as the confetti fell and the championship trophy was handed to him, Jordan knew this was just the beginning. He had always been driven by something deeper, a need to prove not just to others but to himself that he was the best. The championship didn't satisfy him completely. It opened a new door. He had finally achieved his dream, but now there was another goal: greatness. True greatness. The finals MVP trophy was Jordan's, a well-deserved accolade for his extraordinary play throughout the series. His performance in the finals was a culmination of everything he had worked for: his scoring, his leadership, and his unrelenting drive to win. But the victory wasn't just about him. It was about the team, the work they had done together, the bond they had forged, and the belief that they could win it all. Scottie Pippen, Horace Grant, and the rest of the Bulls had stepped up in ways that hadn't been expected. Jordan may have been the centerpiece, but he wasn't alone. As the confetti settled, and the party raged on, Jordan's mind was already on the next challenge. Winning one championship wasn't enough for him. The taste of victory was sweet, but he knew he had to keep pushing. The NBA had changed that year. The Bulls had emerged as a powerhouse, and Jordan had established himself as the league's dominant force. But the question remained, could he maintain that level of greatness year after year? The 1991 Finals marked a turning point in NBA history. It was the beginning of the Michael Jordan era, a time when the Chicago Bulls would go on to dominate the NBA, winning 6 championships in 8 years. But the seeds for that dominance were planted in the finals against the Lakers. Jordan had proven that he was more than just a regular season star. He was a champion. And as the Chicago Bulls celebrated their first championship, the NBA world knew one thing for certain: Michael Jordan's legacy had officially begun. The road to greatness was never easy, and for Jordan, it had just started. But with his first NBA championship, he had silenced the doubters and stepped into the role of a true champion. It wasn't just about winning the title, it was about the journey, the lessons learned, and the relentless pursuit of excellence. For Michael Jordan, the challenge was never about one title. It was about proving that he was the greatest to ever play the game. And this was just the beginning. The 1993 NBA Finals were shaping up to be a defining moment for Michael Jordan. After leading the Chicago Bulls to their third consecutive championship the year before, Jordan had firmly cemented his place as one of the greatest basketball players in history. But as the 1993 season drew to a close, something was beginning to change. It wasn't just the physical grind of winning 3 straight championships or the looming pressures of being the face of the NBA, it was the internal battles Jordan was facing that were starting to take their toll. In the midst of his dominance, Jordan began to experience a deep emotional and personal fatigue. The spotlight that had once felt exhilarating now felt suffocating. The constant media scrutiny, the demands of being an icon, and the relentless pursuit of perfection were starting to weigh on him. His body was tired, his spirit was drained, and the burden of constantly living up to expectations was beginning to crack his facade of invincibility. As the finals against the Phoenix Suns approached, Jordan's mind was somewhere else. His passion for the game, which had once burned so brightly, was dimming. A sense of doubt began to creep in, and for the first time in his career, Michael Jordan wasn't sure if he wanted to continue playing basketball. At the age of 30, he was on top of the world, yet a part of him longed for something more. The Suns were no slouches. Led by MVP Charles Barkley, they were a formidable team, and they presented a serious challenge to the Bulls dynasty. Phoenix was hungry for a championship, and they were playing with a chip on their shoulder. But even with all the talent the Suns had, it was clear to anyone watching that the true battle in the 1993 Finals was internal. Michael Jordan was fighting his own demons. Game 1 of the Finals showcased the brilliance of both teams. Jordan scored 31 points, leading the Bulls to a 100-92 victory. However, it was a hollow victory for Jordan. As much as he loved to win, there was a part of him that wasn't satisfied. The game felt more like a chore than a joy. As the days went by, Jordan found himself struggling to summon the same intensity he had in past finals. Despite the public perception that he was invincible, the man behind the jersey was deeply conflicted. As the series continued, it was clear that Jordan's focus wasn't where it used to be. In Game 2, the Suns hit back hard, with Barkley leading the charge. The Bulls lost 108-98, and Jordan seemed off his game. He still managed to score 42 points, but there was a disconnection between his body and mind. He wasn't as engaged, as hungry, as he had been in years past. The weight of the finals wasn't just about the opponent, it was about the fatigue that was slowly gnawing at him. By Game 3, the tension was palpable. The media caught wind of Jordan's struggles, speculating whether this could be the end of his dominance. The pressure was mounting. Despite all the external noise, Michael Jordan was a perfectionist, and failure in any form, no matter how small, was something he couldn't bear. The series was tied 1-1, and Game 3 became a pivotal moment not just for the championship, but for Jordan's mental state. In the third quarter of Game 3, during a moment of frustration, Jordan missed a routine shot, something uncharacteristic for him. The shot felt like more than just a miss, it was symbolic of the larger battles he was fighting. He had spent years training his body to be perfect, but now his mind was faltering. The constant pressure of living up to the impossible standards he had set for himself had caught up with him. His confidence, usually rock solid, was starting to crack. He could feel it, and so could his teammates. Jordan knew that he was on the brink. For the first time, he questioned his place in the game, and whether he could ever truly sustain the level of greatness he had reached. He had conquered everything, 3 championships, MVPs, accolades, but it all felt like too much to carry. He was exhausted, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. The locker room after Game 3 was silent, a stark contrast to the usual boisterous celebrations or fiery speeches. Jordan's teammates were unsure of what to say, but they could see it in his eyes, the familiar fire was not there. He was struggling. Jordan himself was uncertain of the next step. Would he keep going? Or had he reached the end of the line? In the face of the mounting pressure, something shifted in Jordan. His teammates, led by Scottie Pippen, rallied around him. They reminded him of what they had achieved together. Jordan's doubts began to fade as he found strength in the support of the people who had been with him throughout the journey. It was never just about him, it had always been about the team. Game 4 would be the turning point. Jordan, still unsure of himself, took to the court with a different mindset. He couldn't allow the doubt to consume him. The Bulls couldn't win without him. His leadership, his skill, his drive were indispensable. In a game filled with intensity and emotion, Jordan played like the champion he was, scoring 55 points and leading the Bulls to a crucial 111-105 victory. It wasn't just the points, it was the resilience. He fought through his mental fatigue, his emotional struggles, and the external pressures. The win wasn't just a victory in the finals, it was a victory over his own doubts. As the series progressed, Jordan's confidence began to return. The mental struggle didn't disappear overnight, but Jordan had learned to overcome it. The Suns never gave up easily, but the Bulls' resolve was unshakable. The defining moment came in Game 6, when Jordan put up 41 points to seal the championship for the Bulls. The Bulls won the series 4-2, securing their third straight title and cementing their place as one of the greatest teams in NBA history. But for Michael Jordan, the victory was bittersweet. The championship was his third, but the journey had taken its toll. He had won, but it wasn't the same as it had been before. The exhaustion, the pressure, and the mental struggle had pushed him to his breaking point. The realization hit him hard. He had given everything to the game, but in doing so, he had lost a part of himself. The spark that had once driven him to be the best in the world was beginning to fade. In the aftermath of the finals, Jordan made a decision that would shock the world. He announced his retirement from basketball. The decision wasn't just about the toll the game had taken on his body, but also the emotional and mental exhaustion that had drained him. For the first time in his career, Jordan felt like he needed a break from the game that had defined his life. He stepped away from basketball at the peak of his career, leaving the NBA and the Chicago Bulls behind. Jordan's retirement was a dramatic turning point, not just for him, but for the entire basketball world. The man who had conquered everything now found himself at a crossroads. But what would become clear in the coming years was that Jordan's story wasn't over. His time away from the game would be temporary. The greatest player to ever play the game wasn't done yet. He was simply finding his way back to the passion and drive that had once defined him. In the fall of 1995, after a brief stint in professional baseball, Michael Jordan returned to the NBA, proving once again that his love for the game was unbreakable. The struggle, the doubts, and the exhaustion he had felt during the 1993 finals had been part of a journey, one that ultimately made him stronger. Michael Jordan's rise and fall, and his eventual return, would mark the next chapter in an already legendary career. But for now, in 1993, he had stepped away from the game, unsure of what the future held, but confident that when the time was right, he would return to claim his place at the top once again. The locker room was quiet. The kind of silence that felt heavy, thick with frustration and disappointment. The game had ended hours ago, but the sting of failure still lingered in the air. The young player sat at his locker, hunched over, trying to catch his breath, though he knew there was no physical exhaustion that could account for the weight he felt. His hands were trembling as he gripped his jersey, the fabric slightly damp with sweat that had dried too quickly, leaving him chilled. His teammates had left, or at least, they were pretending to be busy. The room felt too loud now with all the noise in his head. There was no escaping it, the missed free throws. His mistake. His failure. The loss. Everyone had seen it, and now it was his responsibility to carry the shame. He'd heard the murmurs from the stands, the disappointment that could be felt through the silence of the gym after the game ended. He wasn't supposed to be here, in the big leagues. Not after this. The questions raced through his mind. Did he belong? Was he good enough? Would anyone ever trust him again? He didn't want to face his teammates or his coaches. He didn't want to face anyone. He just wanted to disappear. To make it all go away. The locker room door creaked open, and he didn't have to look up to know who it was. The way the door opened, deliberately slow, yet with purpose, told him it could only be one person, Michael Jordan. Jordan wasn't in his typical post-game celebratory mood. He didn't look like he was here to give a pep talk or rally the team for the next game. He simply walked in and stood there, not saying anything at first, not moving towards the young player. He just let the silence build. There was a calm intensity to Jordan's presence, a quiet command that made everything else fade into the background. It was as if he didn't need to speak, and yet, somehow, his very presence was enough. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jordan spoke. "You know, I've missed free throws too." The words hung in the air, soft and understated. The young player looked up, surprised to hear anything from his idol. Michael Jordan, the man who had conquered the NBA and was known for his fierce competitive spirit, was admitting to failure. The young player blinked, unsure of what to say. He was still too caught up in the aftermath of his own mistakes to even begin to process Jordan's words. Jordan continued, his voice steady but carrying a depth that resonated with experience. "I know what it's like. To be in the spotlight and to mess up when it matters most. But here's the thing. That doesn't define you. It's not the miss, it's how you handle it. That's what separates the good from the great." The young player swallowed hard. It felt surreal to hear these words coming from Michael Jordan, the very person whose name was synonymous with winning, with greatness. He had built a career around never failing, at least, never failing on the big stage. Yet here he was, telling him, in a quiet and unassuming way, that failure was not only inevitable, it was a stepping stone. "I remember the first time I choked in a big game," Jordan went on. "It was in college. The game was on the line, and I missed a shot that I should have made. The whole team was depending on me, and I let them down. It was a huge moment, and I felt like I'd ruined everything. I thought maybe I wasn't cut out for it, that I wasn't good enough. But you know what? I didn't quit. I came back. And I got better." Jordan took a seat next to the young player, his presence no longer looming but instead offering a sense of quiet solidarity. "The truth is, you'll have moments like this. You'll miss shots. You'll lose games. You'll make mistakes. But those mistakes don't define you. It's what you do next that matters. It's how you get up and keep pushing forward that shows what kind of player you really are. The young player felt his chest tighten, not from the weight of the mistake, but from something else, the realization that maybe this moment didn't have to define his career. Maybe it could just be a chapter in a larger story. He looked at Jordan, who seemed so composed, yet the words coming from him were not of a champion, but of someone who had been through the toughest battles and come out on the other side stronger. I don't expect you to shake this off right now, Jordan continued, his eyes locking onto the young players. You're hurt. You're frustrated. You feel like you've let people down. I get that. I've been there. But in time, you'll realize that the best players don't just get over their failures, they learn from them. And those lessons, the ones you don't want to deal with right now, are the ones that will shape your career. The young player sat there, absorbing every word. He wanted to believe it. He wanted to believe that this one mistake wouldn't be the end. That it could be part of a larger journey, one where he could still come out on top. But the doubt still lingered, threatening to swallow him whole. How could he face his teammates after this? How could he face the fans who would surely be disappointed in him? Jordan seemed to read his thoughts. I'm not going to tell you this will be easy. But I will tell you this, you're not alone. I've been in your shoes. I've been doubted. I've been criticized. But I came back every single time because I believed in what I could do. I believed in my team, and I believed in myself. The young player nodded, his throat tight as he fought back the swell of emotion rising in him. He hadn't expected this conversation, certainly not from the person he had always looked up to. It felt like the weight of the world had been lifted just a little bit, and for the first time since the game ended, he didn't feel completely broken. Now, Jordan said, standing up. You've got a job to do. You've got a game to prepare for. And when you step back out on that court, I want you to remember this, what happened tonight isn't who you are. It's just a moment. And you're gonna be better for it. You'll come back stronger. With those final words, Jordan walked out of the locker room, leaving the young player with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't sure if he'd ever completely shake off the feeling of failure, but Jordan had given him something more important, the strength to move forward. The young player took a deep breath, wiped his hands across his face, and stood up. It wasn't the end of the road. It was just the beginning. His journey wasn't defined by one missed free throw, it was defined by how he would respond to it. And that, in the end, was the greatest lesson of all. The Chicago Bulls were on the verge of greatness. Michael Jordan had already established himself as the best player in the NBA, but the one thing that had eluded him, what everyone had been waiting for, was the championship. He had the talent, the drive, and the support of his team, but there was a wall in front of him, a wall made up of the Detroit Pistons. They weren't just a team, they were a physical manifestation of everything Jordan wanted to overcome: toughness, grit, and a defensive strategy built to stop him at all costs. The rivalry between the Bulls and the Pistons had become a symbol of Jordan's struggle for respect in the NBA. The Pistons, known as the Bad Boys, played a style of basketball that was as much about physical intimidation as it was about skill. They had no interest in making the game easy for anyone, especially not for the young star in Chicago. The Pistons were led by Isaiah Thomas, and with the likes of Bill Laimbeer, Dennis Rodman, and Rick Mahorn, they built their success around a brutal, no-holds-barred approach to defense. They were a team that relished in making opponents uncomfortable, especially the best player on the opposing team. For Jordan, this was more than just a basketball challenge, it was a test of character. The Pistons' constant physical play pushed him to his limits. They fouled hard, they played aggressively, and they didn't care about the rules when it came to taking down the opposition star player. Jordan, used to being the most dominant player on the floor, found himself on the receiving end of the toughest treatment of his career. But this wasn't just about basketball. The Pistons were trying to break him mentally, trying to force him to doubt himself, to make him question if he had the will to fight through the adversity. The 1988 Eastern Conference Finals were one of the first real tests of this rivalry. The Bulls had been improving year after year, But the Pistons were still the reigning kings of the Eastern Conference. The matchup was almost poetic in its inevitability. The Bulls had Jordan, the future of the NBA. The Pistons had experience, toughness, and the mental edge that came with winning championships. It was the new wave of talent versus the established champions, and for Jordan, it felt like the beginning of the battle he would have to win to prove that he belonged. In the 1988 series, the Pistons didn't just beat the Bulls, they pushed Jordan to his breaking point. Jordan was fouled relentlessly, his body battered by the sheer physicality of the Pistons' defense. They didn't allow him to be the free-flowing, explosive player he had been in the regular season. Instead, they took away his space, his rhythm, and his comfort. The infamous Jordan rules were born, a set of strategies designed to frustrate, stop, and wear down Jordan: hard fouls, double teams, and constant pressure. But Jordan didn't give up. Even as he faced repeated physical punishment, he kept coming back for more. In Game 3 of the 1988 series, Jordan exploded for 55 points, showing everyone that the Pistons could not break his will. But despite his heroics, the Pistons were simply too much, and they closed out the series 4-1. It was another early playoff exit for the Bulls, and another chapter in Jordan's quest to prove himself. Despite the defeat, Jordan wasn't defeated. In fact, the loss only fueled his desire to take his game to the next level. The frustration he felt in the 1988 series, the way the Pistons had bullied him and the Bulls, was a turning point. Jordan knew that to win, he had to get tougher. He couldn't just rely on his athleticism and skill, he had to develop a mental toughness that matched his physical gifts. This was the moment that Jordan started to refine not only his game but his mindset. He realized that if he wanted to get past the Pistons, he would have to match their aggression, and more importantly, he would have to learn how to thrive under pressure. The following season saw Jordan's game evolve. He wasn't just focusing on scoring, he began to play smarter. He worked on his defense, improving his ability to play through contact, and learning how to draw fouls and capitalize on the physicality of the game. He also built his body, adding muscle to withstand the pounding from defenders like Laimbeer and Mahorn. Jordan knew that if he was ever going to get past the Pistons, he had to be prepared to fight in a different way. In 1990, the Bulls faced the Pistons again in the Eastern Conference Finals. This time, the Bulls were better equipped to challenge Detroit. Jordan was at the peak of his powers, and the supporting cast, led by Scottie Pippen, was finally coming together. The Bulls were a more cohesive unit, and Jordan was finally getting the help he had longed for in the previous years. But the Pistons were still the defending champions, and they didn't give up easily. The series was a war of attrition. The Pistons didn't hold back their physical style, and Jordan again found himself taking brutal hits. But he had grown. He was no longer intimidated. He took the hits and fought back with equal intensity. It was a hard-fought, grueling series, but Jordan wasn't backing down. In Game 7, the Bulls emerged victorious, clinching a 93-74 win. For the first time in his career, Michael Jordan had beaten the Pistons in the playoffs, and it felt like more than just a win, it was a breakthrough. Jordan's victory over the Pistons wasn't just a triumph over a rival team, it was a statement that he had overcome the psychological and physical hurdles that had plagued him for so long. He had finally broken through, showing that he was not just the best player in the NBA, but one who could handle the pressure of playoff basketball, no matter how brutal it got. But even as the Bulls celebrated their victory, Jordan knew that this wasn't the end of the story. The challenge wasn't just about overcoming the Pistons, it was about what came next. The next step was the NBA Finals. The Bulls had defeated the Pistons, but now they had to face the Lakers, and this time, Jordan wasn't just competing for a playoff spot, he was fighting for a championship. The 1991 Finals would prove to be the ultimate test of everything he had learned. It was the culmination of years of struggle, growth, and mental toughness. And for Michael Jordan, it wasn't just about winning the championship, it was about proving that the years of fighting through adversity had paid off. The rivalry with the Pistons had shaped him in ways that no other team could. They had pushed him to become the player he was destined to be, the player who could take on anyone and win. The Pistons, in their relentless pursuit of stopping Jordan, had unknowingly made him stronger. They had been his toughest challenge, but they had also been the ones who helped him realize that to be the greatest, he had to be more than just a talented scorer. He had to be tougher, smarter, and unbreakable. Jordan had finally conquered his biggest hurdle, and as he walked into the NBA Finals, it wasn't just about a championship, it was about showing the world that he could overcome any challenge, no matter how brutal or difficult. The rivalry with the Pistons had set the stage for the next chapter of his legacy, and with the finals on the horizon, Jordan knew that his moment had finally arrived. After Michael Jordan's shocking retirement in 1993, the basketball world seemed to stop. The game that had been dominated by Jordan's brilliance now had a glaring absence. Fans, analysts, and even his teammates were left wondering, would Michael Jordan ever return? And if so, would he still be the same player? Jordan's decision to step away from the game after 3 consecutive championships was a profound one. He cited the personal loss of his father, James Jordan Sr., who had been tragically murdered earlier that year, as a major factor in his decision. He needed a break, both mentally and emotionally. At the height of his career, Jordan walked away from the game that had defined him. During his brief hiatus from the NBA, Jordan turned his attention to baseball, following his father's dream for him to play professional baseball. In 1994, he signed with the Chicago White Sox and played for their Double-A affiliate, the Birmingham Barons. Although his baseball career wasn't spectacular, Jordan was determined. His athleticism and competitive nature allowed him to hold his own, but deep down, he knew that his true calling was on the basketball court. Meanwhile, the NBA and the Chicago Bulls were moving on without him. The Bulls, led by coach Phil Jackson, had successfully navigated the post-Jordan era, though they were a shadow of the team that had dominated the 1990s. Despite a solid roster and strong performances from players like Scottie Pippen, the team lacked the irreplaceable leadership that Jordan provided. The Bulls were good, but they weren't great. However, it was clear that no one in Chicago had forgotten about Michael Jordan. And in March 1995, after 17 months away from the game, Jordan made his long-anticipated return to the NBA with a simple statement, "I'm back." The announcement sent shockwaves through the league. Could the man who had taken the game by storm and retired at his peak still perform at the level that had made him a legend? Could he reinsert himself into the Bulls lineup without disrupting the flow of a team that had been playing well in his absence? When Jordan returned, it wasn't with fanfare or a grand entrance. He wasn't the same young player he had been when he left. The physical conditioning was there, but his timing, his rhythm, and his overall basketball IQ would take time to return to the level he had reached before his retirement. The team had moved on in his absence, but Jordan wasn't about to let that stop him. His presence was magnetic, even if his game wasn't immediately up to the standards he had set for himself. Jordan's first few games back were a mixture of rust and brilliance. His shooting wasn't as sharp, his explosiveness slightly dulled, and his defense not as crisp as before. Yet, even in the early stages of his return, it was clear that Jordan's mind and competitive spirit were still intact. His basketball IQ was unparalleled, and it wasn't long before the shots started to fall, the defense began to clamp down, and the leadership that had made him a champion reappeared. The 1995 playoffs would be Jordan's first test in his return. The Chicago Bulls, despite having the MVP-caliber Scottie Pippen, were struggling to find the same dominance they had in the past. They faced off against the Orlando Magic, a team that had just gained a new superstar in Shaquille O'Neal and had the up-and-coming talent of Penny Hardaway. The Magic were hungry, young, and full of energy, while the Bulls were an older team with a star returning from retirement. Despite Jordan's efforts, the Magic proved to be too much in that series. They won 4-2, and for the first time in years, Michael Jordan was on the sidelines, watching his team lose in the playoffs. The loss stung, but it wasn't the end of the story. Jordan, still in the process of finding his rhythm, knew he had work to do. The defeat to the Magic was more than just a setback, it was a lesson in humility. It reminded Jordan that nothing, not even his own genius, was guaranteed. He would have to work harder than ever to get back to the top. By the time the 1995-96 season began, Jordan was back in form. His confidence was restored, his rhythm was back, and his body had once again adjusted to the demands of professional basketball. The Chicago Bulls, with the addition of Ron Harper, Steve Kerr, and the emergence of Tony Kukoc, were once again a championship contender. The team was firing on all cylinders, but it was Jordan who made the difference. His competitive edge, his hunger to prove himself after his brief absence, and his ability to elevate the play of everyone around him propelled the Bulls to the best regular season record in NBA history at the time, 72-10. That 1995-96 season would become a defining year for Jordan and the Bulls. They stormed through the regular season, but the real test would come in the playoffs. The Bulls faced a number of tough challenges along the way, but none more significant than their matchup with the Seattle Supersonics in the NBA Finals. The Sonics, led by Gary Payton, had one of the league's top defenses and were known for their physicality. This was going to be another test for Jordan, a test to see if he could return to championship form after a year away from the game. Game 1 of the Finals was a message. The Bulls, led by Jordan's 36 points, dominated the Sonics and won in commanding fashion. Jordan wasn't just back, he was as good as ever. His game had evolved. He was still the most explosive player on the court, but now, his leadership and understanding of the game had reached a new level. Jordan was no longer just a scorer, he was a complete player, capable of affecting every aspect of the game. The Sonics fought back in the series, but it was clear they couldn't match up with the Bulls' intensity. In the end, Chicago won the series 4-2, securing their 4th championship and Jordan's 4th NBA Finals MVP award. The win marked Jordan's return to the pinnacle of the game, proving that he hadn't lost a step. His comeback had been not just successful, it had been dominant. But for Jordan, this was about more than just winning a title. It was about proving to himself that he could come back and reclaim his place at the top of the basketball world. The 3-year hiatus, the loss to the Magic in 1995, and the hard work he had put in to get back to his prime had all culminated in this moment. The 1996 championship was the first of 3 straight, marking the start of a new dynasty for the Bulls. With each title, Jordan's legacy continued to grow, and with each championship, the myth of his invincibility was further solidified. Michael Jordan's return was about more than just basketball. It was a story of redemption, of overcoming obstacles, and of proving that the greatest player in the world wasn't done yet. His comeback in 1995 was a testament to his mental toughness, his dedication, and his desire to always be the best. The first three-peat of his second run with the Bulls was just the beginning of what would become one of the most legendary periods in NBA history. For Jordan, it wasn't just about the championships, it was about the journey. And with every title, he was cementing his place as the greatest player to ever play the game. His return wasn't just a victory for the Bulls, it was a victory for basketball itself. Michael Jordan had come back, and he was better than ever. The 1998 NBA Finals were supposed to be the final chapter in Michael Jordan's career, a fitting end to a legacy that had redefined the sport of basketball. The Chicago Bulls, once again, were on the verge of greatness, but this time it was different. The team had been through so much, the trials of the previous seasons, the battles with rivals like the Detroit Pistons and the New York Knicks, and, of course, the years of dominance led by Jordan himself. This was it, the final season, the final opportunity for one last championship. Jordan had already achieved so much in his career. He had won 5 MVP awards, 6 championships, and was universally regarded as the greatest basketball player to ever step onto the court. He had built a dynasty in Chicago, with 2 three-peats to his name. His dominance was unmatched, and his competitive spirit was legendary. Yet, as the 1997-98 season unfolded, the sense that this might be his last rodeo loomed large. The Chicago Bulls were aging. Scottie Pippen, once his closest teammate, was suffering through injuries. The coaching situation with Phil Jackson was uncertain. The writing was on the wall. The era of the Bulls was coming to an end. Despite all of the external pressures, media speculation, internal friction, and the expectation that Jordan would retire for good, the competitive fire inside him remained as intense as ever. The season, however, was a struggle. Injuries, a grueling schedule, and the reality of playing through a season that felt like a swan song for one of the greatest ever started to weigh on Jordan. But he wasn't done yet. The final months of the season were a reflection of the mental fortitude Jordan had always carried with him. Even in the face of physical decline and mounting pressure, he rose to the occasion. The 1998 NBA Finals was an emotional and dramatic stage, where the Bulls were set to face the Utah Jazz, another team on the verge of greatness, led by the legendary John Stockton and Karl Malone. The Jazz were a formidable opponent, pushing the Bulls to their limits in every game. Jordan, even at 35 years old, showed the world that he wasn't ready to step away from the game just yet. His performances were as spectacular as ever, reminding everyone why he was the most feared player in the league. Game 6 of the finals would be the culmination of it all. The Bulls were up 3-2 in the series, and Game 6 was the chance to clinch the championship. The game itself was tightly contested, with both teams fighting for every point. But as the game wore on, it became apparent that this would be the final stage for Michael Jordan, the player who had defined an entire generation of basketball. The Utah Jazz had made it clear they wouldn't go down without a fight, but Jordan was relentless. With the game tied and less than 30 seconds on the clock, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. Jordan dribbled to the top of the key, eyeing the basket. The Jazz defense closed in on him, but he sidestepped, creating just enough space. The shot went up, and in the blink of an eye, the ball swished through the net. It was the perfect ending. With that final shot, Jordan had won his 6th NBA championship, his 6th Finals MVP, and solidified his legacy as the greatest basketball player to ever play the game. The building erupted in cheers, but for Jordan, the celebration was bittersweet. He had done it. He had reached the pinnacle one last time. But with that shot, the era of the Bulls, and perhaps the era of Michael Jordan's dominance, had come to a close. The world watched as he stood on the court, the weight of the moment heavy on his shoulders, with tears in his eyes. His teammates surrounded him, and the emotion was palpable. The finality of it all was sinking in. Jordan had given everything to the game, and now, it was time to say goodbye. The farewell was difficult, not just for Jordan but for the entire basketball world. The Chicago Bulls had been the embodiment of success for so long, and now it seemed that the game would have to move on without him. The basketball community had seen Jordan rise from the young, hungry star who struggled to overcome obstacles to the icon who had redefined the game with his style, charisma, and legendary performances. It wasn't just the victories or the records, it was the way Jordan carried himself, his determination, and his refusal to accept anything less than greatness. In the locker room after the finals victory, Jordan made his final statement to the world. The emotional weight of his words resonated with his teammates and the media alike. He didn't just say goodbye to basketball, he was saying goodbye to a chapter of his life that had shaped him into the man he had become. He had conquered everything. But more importantly, he had shown the world that greatness wasn't just about talent, it was about perseverance, resilience, and the ability to overcome adversity. Jordan's retirement wasn't just about walking away from the game. It was the end of an era in the NBA. No one would ever again dominate the way Jordan had. His impact on the game was unparalleled. But even as he walked away from the court for the final time, he knew that his legacy would live on, not just through the 6 championships or the countless records, but through the inspiration he had instilled in generations of players who grew up idolizing him. His presence in the NBA was larger than life, and his influence would forever shape the future of the league. As Jordan retired for a second time, he found peace in the knowledge that he had given everything to the game. His story was complete. There was no need for a comeback. He had won. He had proven that no challenge was too great, no obstacle insurmountable. Michael Jordan had reached the pinnacle, and his place in history was secure. In the years that followed, Jordan's impact only continued to grow. He became an influential figure not just in basketball but in the world at large. His name, his brand, and his legacy transcended the sport. Michael Jordan had turned basketball into an international phenomenon, and his influence reached far beyond the court. His story was a testament to what one person could achieve with enough dedication, discipline, and heart. And so, the story of Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player of all time, came to a close. But his legacy, his example of determination and success, would live on forever. The final shot, the 6 championships, and the indomitable spirit that had defined him would continue to inspire future generations of athletes, proving that greatness isn't something you're born with. It's something you earn, through hard work, sacrifice, and an unrelenting pursuit of excellence. In the end, Michael Jordan didn't just change basketball, he changed the way the world viewed greatness. And that, in itself, is the most enduring legacy of all.